there are a couple things looking at the Supreme Court. Where do I begin? Okay, number one, I don't believe in like genuine differences in opinion in terms of interpretations of the Constitution. I think that it's just like it's just a way to intellectualize a reactionary framework that you're operating off of.
The Supreme Court hears arguments this morning on a major national question, the question of whether a single judge can make a decision.
Sorry, my lawyer, the people's defender, the people's public defender, Alex Lull overruled, was like, "Oh, what? You're live?" Which is shocking. All right. I wanted to cover this Israel ambassador, the UN Israel's UN ambassador and his takes here before we move on. But now we're gonna get to domestic news. Supreme Court is weighing on a judge's power on policies nationwide in birthright citizenship cases. Now, the reason why the Supreme Court is weighing on this hyper-specific angle on birthright citizenship is because tackling the issue of birthright citizenship directly is a bridge too far that even Trump's legal team understands would be declared unconstitutional instantly. Okay? So for that reason, they are trying to massage, like they're trying to basically undermine the power of lower courts on actions that they declare are taken by the federal government. Okay, this is a Supreme Court case that is supposed to be about whether or not the federal government can take away birthright citizenship, which is unconstitutional, right? Doing that is unconstitutional. Birthright citizenship is in the Constitution. But because they can't directly tackle that issue, because even the supermajority conservative Supreme Court would obviously look at that and go, this is unconstitutional, get the out of here. They've decided that the angle that they can tackle the issue on is by way of seeing if district courts have the power to issue injunctions and to stop the federal government from engaging in unconstitutional actions.
That applies to the entire country. The details of the case involve President Trump's restrict which children born in the U.S. can be U.S. citizens, also known as birthright citizenship. Jan Crawford is at the Supreme Court for us, watching it all. Jan, good morning. What's at stake here?
Well, good morning. So the Trump administration is saying that one federal judge can't dictate national policy for everyone, while opponents say the alternative would be legal chaos. Now, we talked to an undocumented pregnant woman. She's seeking asylum. She asked us not to show her face.
This expecting mother says she dreams of her baby girl being born an American citizen. She worries without birthright citizenship, her baby could be deported back to Guatemala with her if she's forced to leave, where they both would be unsafe. But judges across the country are rejecting President Trump's efforts to end automatic birthright citizenship, 3 of those judges applying their rulings nationwide. President Trump has blasted those decisions, calling on the Supreme Court to act. Juan Perano, head of the nation's largest Hispanic civil rights organization, disagrees.
What is your concern if the court says no nationwide injunctions?
Well, then you're going to have lawsuits effectively filed in every single state. It's going to tie up the courts, and individuals may lose their protections under the Constitution if that happens.
The Obama and Biden administrations opposed national injunctions, arguing judges in conservative states like Texas, where opponents chose to file lawsuits, were dictating national policy. Now the shoe is on the other foot. A CBS News analysis of more than 300 lawsuits filed against...
Yes, I'm going to watch the new Noel Sampson video later, yes.
The Trump administration found that outside of Washington, D.C., the most are in liberal Massachusetts, followed by Maryland, California, and New York. West Virginia Attorney General J.B. McCuskey says that shows why it's a problem when these rulings apply nationwide.
People begin to look at circuit judges as an extension of the political process, and that is fundamentally disastrous for the way that the public views the...
What are you talking about? It's a part of the separation of powers. What are we? There is no... I don't think there's any legal claim here. I don't think there's any valid legal claim here, okay? Like, the idea that you can... the idea that you can literally undermine the power of the judicial force in this country, the power of the courts here, because you want to expand the federal, the powers of the executive is ridiculous. It is also unconstitutional in and of itself. I don't even think the Supreme Court will go in this direction because it also defangs the Supreme Court. It defangs the entirety of the justice system and its power. Yeah, which is why you're seeing people freaking the f out over this, by the way. SCOTUS betrayal. Amy Coney Barrett slams Trump's legal team on birthright citizenship executive order, siding with liberal Kagan. What do you really think? Should women be allowed on the Supreme Court? And it's not just Amy Coney Barrett either. Brett Kavanaugh has also criticized this too. Like, the only time you'll get some motion on this is probably like Clarence Thomas, you know? And even then, I don't know. There's, I mean, this is yet another instance where we are going to find out if there is any sort of, if there's any sort of power left in the Supreme Court or the judicial system, or if they are going to completely defang it.
Impartiality and the power of our court system.
Disastrous.
But can't they just reverse this when a Democrat gets in the White House? Beautiful take, El Duderino. When is that going to happen, you think? How is that going to happen, you think? You think there will be ever another moment where Democrats come back to power after this? I just don't know.
Why?
Because the court is nothing if it doesn't have its integrity.
Now, the use of these sweeping injunctions has been growing significantly in recent years. There have been 39 of them so far, blocking President Trump's policies in his second term. Tony?
All right, Jan, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
The Supreme Court is hearing arguments over nationwide injunctions blocking President Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship. 3 federal appeals courts have kept the order on hold, finding it very likely unconstitutional. President Trump argues the lower courts exceeded their authority. Now he's asking the Supreme Court to lift the injunctions or at least allow the administration to start planning for the change. So far, the justices have pressed the Trump administration's attorney on the potential impact of eliminating those injunctions. And Justice Brett Kavanaugh waded into the immediate consequences of the order going into effect.
On the day after it goes into effect, this is just a very practical question how this is going to work. What do hospitals do with a newborn? What do states do with a newborn?
I don't think they do anything different. What the executive order says in Section 2 is that federal officials do not accept documents that have the wrong designation of citizenship from people who are subject to the executive order.
How are they going to know that?
The states can continue to, the federal officials will have to figure that out.
How?
So you could imagine a number of ways that the federal officials could.
Such as?
Such as they could require a showing of, dozens in the country. For a temporary visitor, for example, they could see whether they're on a B-1 visa, which would exclude kind of the birthright citizenship in that context.
For all the newborns? Is that how that's going to work?
Again, we don't know because the agencies were never given the opportunity to formulate the guidance. They would have 30
They're only
days.
going to have 30 days to do this. You think they can get it together in time?
They're under, that's what the executive order instructs them to do, and hopefully they will do so. Again, it's a speculative and hypothetical scenario because they were enjoined from even starting that process.
And now the immigrant advocates' attorneys arguing against lifting the injunction. Let's bring in senior White House correspondent Selena Wang and constitutional lawyer Jeff Lewis for more. Jeff, the scope of this hearing is limited to the injunctions, but some of the justices, like we just heard there,
Another
are
RFK
also talking a little bit about the merits of the case at large. What do you make of that?
Well, none of the justices have touched the merits in terms of weighing in on whether or not they think the executive order is enforceable. Instead, they're asking the question about whether they need to discuss the merits in connection with the injunction. And I think at the end of the day, the opinion issued by this judge or by this court is not going to touch the merits of this case.
Selena, what sticks out to you from how the Trump administration...
Am I living in crazy town right now? Is Kavanaugh really the voice of reason on this issue right now? There are a couple things looking at the Supreme Court. Where do I begin? Okay, number one, I don't believe in like genuine differences in opinion in terms of interpretations of the Constitution. I think that it's just like it's just a way to intellectualize a reactionary framework that you're operating off of, and it's purely partisan. Okay. Having said that, there are additional motivations to, at the very least, present the Supreme Court as an independent institution to preserve its legitimacy. Okay? And that motivation is very powerful and plays a role in why the Supreme Court sometimes decides against the right-wing government and its actions. Another very powerful motivator for the Supreme Court judges, the Supreme Court justices, is also to continue letting the Supreme Court have power, okay, the persuasive power that the courts currently have. So this is an instance where I believe the reason why the right-wing Supreme Court justices would not favor the side of the administration is for those two additional reasons. One, because it defangs the power that the judicial structure has, the power that the courts have. It directly undermines the separation of powers. And therefore, because it directly undermines the separation of powers, it also undermines the legitimacy of the Supreme Court as an institution. If they were to aggressively fucking unconstitutional decision of the current administration, then it would brick the system in its entirety. It would render the courts useless. And that is the reason I think as to why you hear right-wing justices in this matter, as they did in the previous due process matter that took place in front of the Supreme Court, where they had a unanimous decision against the Trump administration, but did so in a very cowardly way, where they could hide behind the language that they use, where they said we would want you to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. They will come out against the administration. They will come out against the administration because it directly undermines their institutional legitimacy, and it undermines the power that the courts have altogether. Do you understand?
Is making their case.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the core questions here is, can an individual district judge block the president's policy nationwide? The Trump administration is arguing that the ability of these federal judges to do that is forcing them to race from court to court, trying to win every case that challenges their policies. They argue that this is creating an unfair playing field, saying that those who challenge them can win anywhere, while the Trump administration has to, quote, win everywhere. Now, that was met from a lot of skepticism from Justice Sotomayor, who said that the argument, quote, makes no sense.
HasanAbi about to have a second Russia won't invade Ukraine moment. I mean, I'm not super confident in my assessment. I'm just saying this is why I think they will decide against this instead of rubber stamping this decision. If they do rubber stamp this decision, I mean, that's terrifying. Here, I'll give you motivations as to why they might rubber stamp this decision. It's the same as previous court cases involving previous decisions that the Supreme Court entertained involving like due process. The reason why they would take like a middle of the road approach on severe game changing institution breaking decisions like this one would be out of fear, out of self preservation, out of the fear that they would trigger a constitutional crisis, which would then effectively destroy the power of the Supreme Court. Do you understand? So even if they were to rubber stamp this decision, it would most likely still be out of self-preservation, because in their weird calculations, they think it's even worse if there is if a constitutional crisis is triggered.
Sense whatsoever, saying that it would limit the ability of the district court, but also the Supreme Court to offer nationwide relief. Now, there was one significant...
Have they not already triggered a constitutional crisis with their decision on Kilmar? No, I think that's why they used facilitate instead of effectuate. And left the decision back to lower courts to continue fighting this battle against the Trump administration. Kick the can down the road. But, I mean, depending on your perspective, I feel like we're already hotly inside of a constitutional crisis. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, these guys are doing everything in their power to completely gut the institutions until they can rebuild them. And that is going to be the second phase of this. First, you destroyed the legitimacy of the courts, or you defang the power that the courts have, considering that most of their power is just persuasive to begin with. And if you don't fucking follow their persuasive power, then, you know, what can the courts do? They don't have a fucking army, right? And then they change the rules and they start rewriting the rules to make it legal, to make their actions legal. Okay, this is how it works. We haven't reached, at least for a lot of the Trump administration's agenda, we have not reached the Nuremberg race laws moment yet. But that is where this is headed. First, they defang the courts, then they change the rules and make their actions legal and make it illegal to resist. And then they use the courts to process every single person expeditiously and within the confines of the new American legal structure. And this has happened throughout history, obviously. It's one of the most famous examples of this is slavery, right? A perfectly legal process. It was illegal to free slaves. It was legal to have slaves. Okay, just like in Nazi Germany, it was illegal to be Jewish, and that Jews and other political dissidents and other minority groups were considered non-citizens. They were effectively removed from citizenship, which is ironically exactly what the Trump administration is trying to do. Okay. And resisting against that was illegal. We have not reached that level yet, but I fear that eventually we will. Wait, so the court isn't ruling on the order is legal? They're just ruling on whether or not the lower courts can block it? Yes. Because the Supreme Court, yes, it's a legal trickery, which Republicans love doing all the time. This decision is not whether or not the Trump administration can at the executive, by executive mandate, by executive order, just decide to abolish birthright citizenship. This is not the Supreme Court issuing a decision on the constitutionality of birthright citizenship. This is the Supreme Court issuing a decision on whether or not state like federal judges can issue injunctions at the state level that impacts the executive orders, like stop executive orders at the federal level. And their argument is that you got woke states that basically are operating as political operatives and undermining the goals of the democratically elected right-wing government. Except if federal judges were not allowed to issue injunctions against the executive authority, against the federal government, then they have no power whatsoever. Like, that's kind of the point. Also, the woke judges that they're talking about are like Reagan appointees. These are conservative judges as well. Like, the people that they're considering activist judges are quite literally activist judges, but in the opposite direction. Like, they were appointed as activist judges for the right. They just still happen to believe in maintaining some aspects of the Constitution.
Exchange where she drew an analogy to what if the next president, a new president, issued an executive order banning ownership of guns. She asked if the court would have to, quote, sit back and...
But why defang the courts? They control the legislative branch. Why not change the law now? What do you mean? The reason why they want to defang the courts is because the courts are the last bastion of defense. The Republican Party's 40-year project has been to undermine the legislative body. Right? Through gridlock, through permanent obstruction. They recognized, especially after Mitch McConnell's takeover, under the Obama administration, they realized that they wouldn't even get punished by their voters for consistently engaging in obstruction. Political parties are totally polarized at this point. It doesn't matter. Their base of support cares about ridiculous nonsense like culture war issues and whatnot. They don't care about anything else, okay? And therefore, there is no power in Congress. There's no more power in Congress whatsoever. So a lot of these decisions that change, I guess, de facto change legislation without actually changing federal legislation comes from the state legislatures, which are much easier to dominate through gerrymandering, okay? So they oftentimes will take unconstitutional decisions or ridiculous right-wing bills and present it at the state level. And then at the state level, the only way to combat these decisions is through the justice system. But the justice system is still an independent body within the separation of powers. So they've already destroyed they have already destroyed the power that Congress has effectively. And now they legislate by state legislatures. And now the only way to stop state legislatures is in the hands of the justice system. So that's the last hurdle that they have to clear. So they're now trying to defang the power of the courts. They are on the one hand packing the courts, but on the other, they're still getting injunctions issued against them. So they have to also defang the courts in the interim, only to turn around and I guess like completely rebuild the courts in their own vision. They haven't gotten there yet. A lot of this makes sense when you realize that Republicans don't care about the institutions or the preservation of institutions. They just want to wield power. Their understanding of politics is more sincere and more ruthless and more brutally honest than the liberal Democrat Party's approach is. Okay? The Democratic Party's approach is about preserving the sanctity of institutions. They have this ridiculous notion. That people care about this sort of thing when playing the game of politics. Politics is not about that. No one gives a fuck about the rules. Okay? Politics is about power. It's about distribution of resources. It's about who gets to do violence and who are the targets of said violence. Who gets to have the resources and who doesn't get to have the resources. That's how politics works. And Republicans understand that. And they actually do have the capacity to build decades long. They have the capacity to build on a vision that will solidify power at the top, at the executive, knowing full well that the Democrats, once they are in power, will never wield the executive authority in the same way that Republicans do. And if you want to consolidate power at the executive, you have to take care of all of the hurdles that come your way. And part of that is going to be, in the separation of powers, the courts. It's that simple. Yes, effectively a dictatorship.
Wait for individuals to sue one by one to challenge the constitutionality for such an order.
Jeff, sometimes the justices and the way they ask their questions, they show a little bit of how they're feeling about a particular issue. Do you see that in the questions we're seeing so far from the justices?
Yeah, not as to the merits, but as to the leanings towards a nationwide injunction. I count at least 3 justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, who are hostile to any attack on nationwide injunctions, maybe Barrett. The question is, will there be 5 justices who are willing to strike down nationwide injunctions in this case or in general?
Selena, and I know you're watching some protests outside the court. What are you hearing from demonstrators there?
Yeah, Diane, not too far from where we are now, outside of the Supreme Court, there's a group of protesters, and I spoke to folks who traveled from across the country, including a sizable group that came from California, and they're protesting not only the administration's stance on birthright citizenship, but also the president's immigration.
What is going on today? I love Asmongold. You're a fucking loser, Hasan. You fucking birch. I don't get it. Like, what? I don't understand what this does. Like, what do you think is happening here? You know, he called me a tree, but like, I don't understand why people come in here to do this, like what the purpose of this is. Like, do you think this is, do you think this causes people to be like, you know what, that guy's got some good fucking points? Like, you think that's what's going on? How do you always manage to pinpoint these chatters? How are you going to snipe that and not our new friend who saw the light law? I didn't see the person who saw the light. Whippinator, thank you for the 5 gifted subs. Don't streamers get in trouble when their audiences harasses other streamers? Come on, chatter. Let's be real. Let's be fucking real.
And deportation plans overall. Now, I spoke to one young woman who is the daughter of undocumented migrants. She said this case, of course, hits at home. She said she wants to be here to send a message that they all have a voice, that she's a proud American. I spoke to another young woman who is a first-generation daughter of immigrants.
So I used to be an Asmongold fan. He's been talking nonsense lately. Eventually, people will come to their senses. That's what I believe. That's it. Just like I believe that people have the capacity to maintain charity, no matter how much the well has been poisoned against things that I'm saying or who I am. I think that people still have the capacity to self-reflect. People still have the capacity to recognize right from wrong. People still have the capacity to change their opinions. I value that. I don't hold people to positions that they had in the past. It is not what I believe. It's one of the major principles that I defend over and over again, that reform is possible, rehabilitation is possible, people can change their minds, and I will continue offering charity to those who do.
Immigrants from Mexico, and she's currently a college student. Take a listen to what she told me about why she's here.
We love the United States, and we've been working here for so many years. We've been able to help other communities in our surrounding areas for little to nothing back, any benefits at all. To me, I'm proud to say that I'm a daughter of immigrant parents, the first in my family to go to university, first to graduate, second in my class, and I'm proud to say that my sister is the valedictorian in my class as well. So we are living proof that we've been able to do great things coming to this country to not only provide for ourselves, but to provide to other people.
And we heard the justices ask some of the procedural and logistical questions. Immigration advocates are arguing that if this nationwide injunction is narrowed, that it could cause some real chaos on the ground, because there could be a situation where kids born in some states are considered U.S. citizens, but in other states they are not. So you could see a case of families trying to get to states where their newborn child will be considered U.S. citizens, and that could create overwhelmed hospitals along the border and questions about paperwork, regulations. A lot is up in the air.
All right, Selena Wang, Jeff Lewis, thank you both.